Good evening, everybody. Good evening, good evening. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I want to thank you all for tuning in once again this week. I hope you all enjoyed your 4th of July weekend. I hope you all enjoyed your Independence Day, and I hope you all had an opportunity to rest, rejuvenate, and recover throughout the course of the few days that we've all, celebrated a national holiday, our Independence Day for the USA. So tonight, I have a very, very great guest that's hailing all of the way from Canada today. His name is Dai Manuel, and he is going to be speaking to us about very, very sensitive subjects that are needed. He's not only a lifestyle mentor and personal trainer, he's also an author, and he's a motivational speaker. I came across him through one of my guests that I had on last year, Miss Elizabeth Meredith. She referred me to this gentleman, and after having a talk with him, I was very impressed about what he had to share and what he had to bring to the table. So I made the decision to book him for this evening's broadcast because I want both of us to have a conversation about masculinity. But I also want both of us to have an opportunity to talk about what it means to be healthy from a spiritual sense, a physical sense, and in an emotional sense, and from a psychological sense. So that is what we're going to be doing for the second half of the show. He's going to be joining us for the second half of the show from 6 to 6:30. 6:30 to 7 p.m. That's the second half of the show. Excuse me. But from 6 to 6:30 p.m., we are going to talk a little bit about masculinity and what that means, but we're also going to talk about what it means to set goals and what it means to be successful and what it means to demonstrate a level of strength. So I'm going to talk about that, but I did some research, and I did some research about what the meaning of masculinity is. And I'm going to share a little bit of my findings with you all so that you all can just generate some thoughts and ideas about what you think it means. But we're going to have a really, really engaging conversation later on in the show to talk about this more in depth. But for now, I'm going to share it with you guys. So there was an article from psychologytoday.com that was written on August 30th, 2020 from a lady named Catherine Aponte, A Marriage of Equals. That's what her column is called. And it's called Masculinity. Is There Really a Crisis? And in the subtitles, it says that it's no longer the outside for men and the inside for women. And she says that discussions about a crisis in masculinity are widespread. What is the nature of the crisis? It apparently has to do with contemporary uncertainties about what is masculinity, uncertainties over social roles, identity, work, and personal relationships. But is it a crisis in masculinity, or is it a crisis in the relationships between men and women? And she asked the question in this article from Psychology Today, and she says, can we really define masculinity? Usually masculinity is defined in terms of various lists of traits or characteristics. However, there is no authoritative lists of such traits. The list can vary with time, situation, and culture. For example, there are several strategies that try to sort out the type of person who is masculine. And the trait theory, or men are from Mars, women are from Venus theory, social scientists want to define masculinity as those traits on a psychological scale that differentiate between men and women. The norm approach, what is masculine is what ought to be for men, not just what it is. Never happens. Turns out men are different from each other, not just from women. And the symbol of masculinity, which states that this is the strategy by which what is masculine is the symbolic standard, and feminine. I always have a problem saying this. femininity. Femininity is defined as lacking that star quality. But I also read a little bit more in this article, a little bit more in depth. And it says that we now have added the idea of toxic masculinity, in which people rethink certain masculine traits, such as aggression and self-entitlement, which are now viewed as bad. Identifying bad masculinity preserves the idea of good masculinity. It is bad masculinity that causes bullying, harassment, and negative outcomes, health outcomes, for men. While some people talk about toxic masculinity, others rail against what they see as an attack on manhood itself. They see a global crisis in masculinity. The example is Jordan Peterson, a Canadian psychologist and author who has lost faith in masculinity. He says that the West has lost faith in masculinity. He views feminism as an emasculating force, that men ought to be allowed to be unapologetically tough, ambitious, competitive, and forceful. He denounces the murderous equity doctrine that women argue for. So again, this is from an article by Psychology Today that was written by an expert and several experts who want to talk about masculinity. But I'm going to pause right there for a second and elaborate a little bit on what we're going to be talking about this evening. So when we talk about masculinity, we're also going to be talking about what it means to be healthy and what it means to accept yourself for who you are. So Mr. Manuel and I are going to be talking about that for the second half of the show. And we're going to talk about, our plan is to talk about what it means to be masculine, but what it also means to demonstrate strength from a mental standpoint and a spiritual standpoint, as well as from a psychological standpoint when we are navigating through certain things in our lives. And we're also going to be talking about how our physical health and wellness transcends into our emotional health and our psychological well-being. So it says that rapid economic and social and technological changes occurring in the 21st century resulted in large numbers of uprooted and bewildered men in the quest for the masculine identity. It says that using masculinity came with the Industrial Revolution and the middle class notion that men live in the world outside and women live in the world inside. The heightened gender differentiation of this era morphed into biologically determined, timeless truths about masculinity. The idea of masculinity did not exist except in contrast with feminism. Cultures that did not treat men and women as polarized opposites do not have a concept of masculinity in the way that it is used in modern American and European cultures. So again, this is some of what was written in the article from Psychology Today by experts. Now, we're also going to be talking about goals and what it means to set goals and how that transcends into your emotional health, your psychological well-being, and as well as your physical health. Mr. Manuel and I, we're going to address this later on. And I'm also going to talk to him about some of his TED Talks. So when you guys have an opportunity, go to daimanuel.com, or you can also look it up on YouTube. You can look at many of his TED Talks. He has a lot of conversations. He does a lot of TED Talks about this topic, about masculinity, about health and wellness, and about how that transcends into different areas of your life. So Indeed.com also wrote an article. It says it's about career development, and it acts as a career guide. It says how to write SMART goals with examples. It says SMART is an acronym used to describe the process of setting goals. The acronym stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, which are essential traits of setting objectives. The SMART method provides a way to measure your progress and be accountable for your success. Setting SMART goals allow you to realistically evaluate what you are trying to achieve by assessing what actions to take to reach your goal. So an example that they give is when they say that you might set a goal to get better at typing. However, upon evaluating this goal using the SMART method, you see that your goal is quite vague. By restating your goal in quantifiable terms, as be able to type more words per minute, you have a SMART goal that can be obtained. The characteristics of this goal can then be further detailed to reflect the remaining traits of the SMART goal process. So the acronym SMART stands for you when you want to set goals. So when we talk about this acronym and when we think about different areas of our lives, whether it's our physical health and wellness, whether it's our emotional health and wellness, or whether it's our mental or psychological well-being, we have to think about this acronym. So the S stands for specific. It says you have to make your goals specific and narrow for more effective planning. M stands for measurable. It tells us to define what evidence will prove that we are making progress and reevaluate when it's necessary. The A stands for attainable. They said that it's important for us to make sure that we can accomplish reasonable goals within a certain time frame. R stands for relevant, and they say that your goals should align with your values and long-term objectives. Time-based, when we set realistic, ambitious goals with an end date for tasks, we prioritize things and stay motivated. So that's our SMART acronym. But I want to pause for a second and give you guys a minute to think about what it means to establish SMART goals, not just from a physical standpoint. When we talk about taking care of ourselves physically, we just have to think about our lives and what we're doing, and we have to think about the ways in which we interact with others. We have to think about our relationships. We have to think about our families, our friends, our colleagues at work, and just how we are in general. I think that this entire conversation about health and happiness, wellness, fitness, motivation, self-esteem is all about our level of confidence that we are supposed to have within ourselves so that we can achieve great things. Because some of us struggle with self-confidence. I've been very open and honest about my struggles with self-esteem, self-worth, and self-confidence with you guys. And Mr. Manuel he's going to hop on in about 15 to 20 minutes to talk about his struggles. He's talked about it in his TED Talks and within his speaking engagements about what it means to struggle with self-confidence and what it means to demonstrate masculinity and what it means to navigate through all of the obstacles that the world throws at us in order to be masculine in the world where masculinity is defined in different ways. So when we think about our SMART goals, we have to think about what it means to have a SMART goal in different areas of our lives, whether it's losing weight, whether it's managing our finances, whether it's being a better mom or dad, whether it's developing a stronger faith in our deity or in our higher being, whatever that may be for you. We all have to think about our SMART goals, and we all have to think about how important they are, because sometimes we unconsciously tell ourselves that our dreams and that our desires and that our goals don't matter through our actions. Sometimes we sabotage ourselves. Sometimes we cheat ourselves out of opportunities because we may feel as though we don't deserve them, or sometimes we feel as though we aren't worthy of having them or obtaining them. So when we talk about masculinity, when Mr. Manuel and I, when we talk about masculinity this evening, we're going to see how that plays a role into our lives and what we do. The need to be perfect, I can identify with that 100%. Struggling with perfectionism, a person who never wants to make mistakes, a person who never wants to fail at anything that they try. I can identify with that 100%. It's not the idea of failing. but I think that it's more so of the outcomes, what the outcomes may be if I do fail at something. I've been very open and honest with you guys about my fear of failure, and having to start all over. But I'm slowly, I'm gradually learning that, and I've gotten a lot better with that. And I'm not like I used to be, but I'm starting to learn about how, my mistakes are supposed to make me stronger. They're supposed to give me resilience and perseverance through all of the challenges that may come my way. So as I've learned, as I've entered into adulthood, and as I've established myself, and as I'm establishing my foundation as a young man, I often think about what is required of me, but I also think about the fact that just because I fail at something, that doesn't make me a failure. Whether it's, and that could be about anything. It doesn't have to be about, my career. It could also be about anything in my personal life, not just in my professional life. So I think that when we talk about goals, and when we talk about what it means to struggle with perfectionism, what it means to talk about who we are and being comfortable in our own skin and doing our best to go after what we want, being strong and being empowered, we have to think about all of those things. So I gathered some Bible verses after doing some devotion, and after reading, I've gathered some Bible verses about vulnerability and what that really means. And I've also gathered some Bible verses about strength. So I'm going to read some and let you guys think about how strong you are. Because I think that sometimes we underestimate how strong we are. And it's not about how strong we are physically, it's about how strong we are intellectually. And we've all been through things, and we all struggle with something. We all have things that we probably have done that we probably aren't proud of. We all have done things that we wish we would have not done, if that makes sense. So I think that learning how to move forward and forgiving ourselves for what we may not have done in the past, but it's very important for us to forgive ourselves, because it's important to learn how to move forward, because we don't want to cheat ourselves out of opportunities that come our way. We don't want to sabotage ourselves. We don't want to block our own blessings in a way. So when we talk a little bit more about SMART goals, it's Indeed.com says that when you decide to set a goal for yourself, consider following the SMART steps to achieve your objectives. It says, make your goal specific, make your goal measurable, make your goal achievable, make sure it is relevant, create a time-bound schedule. So it says that make your goal specific. The first step in creating an attainable goal is to get specific with how you describe it. Consider it in quantifiable terms and determine what actions you need to get there. Make sure that your goal is measurable. After setting your specific goal, it is time to evaluate how you will take action to measure it. This step in the SMART process prompts you to apply methods of measuring your progress towards achieving a goal. Being measurable also takes into account any actions you want to implement to help you further your progress towards your goal. For instance, this may take the form of tracking the time it takes you to complete an action or to meet a milestone. The following example shows the evolution of a broad goal into a specific and measurable one. It says, make your goal achievable. After writing a specific goal and evaluating how you will measure it, consider if your set objective, how achievable it is. Consider how long it will take. Think about the potential obstacles and measurement methods. All of them will help you determine the realistic odds of achieving your goal. The more realistic and achievable the goal, the more likely you will be able to keep working toward it. Make sure it is relevant. When a goal is relevant, it relates directly to a skill or professional development strategy that you want to improve. Create a time-bound schedule. Time-bound refers to the timeline you set for working toward your goals, as well as how long it will take you to meet milestones and achieve your final results. Consider if your goal is a short-term or a long-term goal. From there, you can determine a timeline and set a schedule for yourself to meet deadlines and get your objective. Your time frame should also be realistic and allow you plenty of opportunities to make adjustments to your goal regarding its relevance and attainability. So when we talk about goals, again, SMART goals, and when we talk about masculinity, and when we talk about physical health and wellness, emotional health and wellness, spiritual health and wellness, and psychological health and wellness, all of these things, all of these factors play an important part into who we are. So as a young man, I do realize how important it is to stay strong and empowered physically, but I also know how important it is to stay strong and empowered mentally. The pandemic has forced me, and I know that it has forced a lot of people out of their comfort zones, being at home with your own thoughts. For a lot of people, they haven't been able to manage their thoughts well. I've talked about it before. The suicide rates have skyrocketed. The domestic abuse rates have skyrocketed. The divorce rates have skyrocketed ever since the beginning of the pandemic. It's forced us outside of our comfort zones, and it's forced us to think about what really matters in our lives. So as a young man, I know how important it is now to stay strong and empowered physically, but I also know how important it is to make sure that my mental health and wellness is in check. I also know how important it is to stay prayerful and stay devoted to God's word. I also know how important it is to maintain healthy relationships with others. I know how important it is to make sure that I'm doing a self-evaluation every single day. I realize how important it is to check my character every single day. And I'm learning how to demonstrate a level of self-respect. Having opportunities come my way, it is definitely a way for me to check myself. It forces me to hold myself to a higher standard, not in an unreasonable standard, but setting high expectations, ones that are reasonable and obtainable as a young man. And I know that many people, many men in particular, struggle with self-confidence. Many men struggle with, self-respect. I know a lot of men struggle with self-love. I know a lot of men struggle with feeling wanted and feeling important in different areas of their lives. So I think that it's important for us to realize that, there's more to it than what's on the surface. We don't realize what our insecurities are until someone else points them out to us. We don't realize what our weaknesses are until someone else points them out to us. So it's important for us to think about it when we talk about goals and SMART goals, when we talk about masculinity, and when we talk about physical health and wellness, emotional health and wellness, spiritual health and wellness, and health and wellness from a psychological standpoint. All of them are important, and it's important for us not to neglect any of them. It's important for us to uphold each of them to a high standard. So since he's waiting, I'm going to bring him on. Mr. Manuel is going to be joining us now. He's hailing all the way from Canada. So I'm happy. Yes. So I'm happy to introduce you. Welcome to my show. Thanks again. And a big shout out to Miss Elizabeth Meredith for making this connection happen. So Mr. Manuel, thank you for being on my show. I was talking to the listeners about a little bit about, your TED Talk and what you like to promote. So could you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, first of all, you don't have to call me Mr. Manuel. You can just call me Dai.
Okay.
And I got this Welsh first name. I know it's really weird, but Dai is a Welsh name for David. And I know people are probably like, what? How does that work? And it's sort of like Richard and Dick. It's sort of that shortening, that pet name. So if you ever go to Wales and you hear the name Dai, it's just a guy named David. All right. So anyways, from way up here in Canada, hello, everyone. And it's an honor to be here. And, I'm 44 years young. I'm a dad of 2 teenage girls. They're now 16 and 18, which they love to remind me of. And I've been dating my wife for the last 21 years. That really sums up me to a T. Everything else I do is really just for fun. And when I talk about fun, I made a decision a number of years ago that whatever I was going to do professionally was going to be something that fulfilled me personally. So I really wanted that to be clear. It was this idea of really trying to align with that sense of purpose, that sense of being, that curious little child within me as well, and trying to get them all to play together. Not so easy, but doesn't mean it isn't worth it, at least worth striving for. And so I support people with big changes, and it happens through lots of different means. I've been in the wellness industries for 26, going on soon to be 27 years, my entire adult life, which is unbelievable to this point that I can't even say I've been doing it for that long, but it's wild. The calendar reminds me every day. But yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm sure there'll be more coming up as we have our conversation, Nelson.
Yes, thanks again for being a part of my broadcast this evening. I was talking to the listeners with a little bit about I watched a couple of your TED Talks. So I want to talk a little bit about your TED Talks. And I know that you also wrote a book a while ago about, your experience in the health and wellness industry. And it gives you tips on how to feel strong and empowered, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, and from a spiritual standpoint as well. So could you tell us a little bit about, because I talked a little bit about masculinity, and I talked about how to obtain SMART goals, and I talked about the acronym and what that means. And
yes,
I've talked about toxic masculinity on my show with a previous guest this year, but I've also been very open and honest with my listeners about what it means to be strong and empowered in each and every area of your life. So could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like and what it means to feel strong and empowered in different areas of your life? Because a lot of people don't think about how important it is to stay strong and empowered in different areas of your life, and how to make sure that your character is, placed in check every single day, doing a self-evaluation of yourself every day.
Wow. Well, first of all, I love talking about this stuff, because it relates to all of us. Like every one of us, we can dive into this, because we are very multifaceted as human beings. Like we're very dynamic. Like let's be honest. Like we've learned to thrive in almost any situation. I mean, we were put on this planet however many eons ago, and humanity's done a pretty good job of making it to the top of the food chain. Now, my environmentalist friends would have some negative comments about that, saying we're almost too resilient at times, but it's in our DNA. Resiliency, the ability to adapt, the ability to evolve. But if you look at how evolution has typically worked for all of us, all of us, we've all experience growth at many different levels in our own lives. You think about just being born, brought into this planet, right? To this life of ours, and what we've experienced in just the first 5 years of life. There's a lot of resiliency being shown. A lot of it. We're learning every single day, and hopefully growing, But there comes a point where I think we all deviate, where we start to become much more in our heads rather than being in feeling into what's going on, neck down. Specifically, some people talk about, going from the head to the heart, right? Going from that idea of trying to rationalize everything to really taking a step back from that and saying, like, you know what? maybe I just have to trust my instincts, trust my gut, that maybe this thing that I'm wanting to do for myself is the right thing to do. And to give you an example, you know, when I was 15 years old, and I won't go into the full story, but I was morbidly obese. You know, and I know that can trigger some people when they hear that term, morbidly obese. There's instant images that pop up in our mind. And you know, when I think back to it at 15 years old, that was when I was my largest. And I'm using a term that the doctor used when he pulled my mom aside and pulled her into the outside of his office, and of course left the door ajar so I could hear the conversation, which I'm sure he did on purpose. But you know, he was telling my mom, Betty Ann, you know, your son's got asthma. He's got, you know, his joints are older than a 15-year-old based on all the stress I was putting on because of my large frame, all the weight I was carrying around. That was hard. You know, it was really hard. Everything was more difficult than that point. But my mind and the way I interpreted the world was definitely skewed because my emotions, I was definitely under a lot of stress. I was feeling a lot of stress. I was also feeling very depressed, withdrawn. And we know these negative emotions that we all experience, it can be all encompassing at times. You know, it feels like it's everything. It is our life, even though it's only a feeling. And often feelings, they come and they go, right? But sometimes when they come, we lock onto them and we hold on to them and we don't want to let them go. And sometimes we don't want to move past those. And I'm not trying not to generalize here because I really should replace this with I, you know, that I'm speaking from my own experience. And I imagine there's people out there that can relate to this. And I realized that it got to a point where I just couldn't do it on my own. You know, I took it as far as I could. I made a change. I just said, I want to get a little healthier. I didn't know what that meant, though. You know, I didn't have any understanding or points of reference of what healthy meant. I just knew there was a time in my life I could remember, because it wasn't so far off at age 15, that I could remember a time of being able to run around with my friends, not get winded, being able to climb a flight of stairs without breaking into a pant, you know, being able to go out for a bike ride and keep up with my friends. You know, I wasn't so far off that I could remember doing those things and it not seeming so challenging. And because I could remember that, I could get back to that place of believing that I could do it again. And here's the thing. I know this very well, that there's people out there that feel like they're so far away from that memory of what it was like before the big challenge showed up. And we all have lots of challenges, trust me. There's never a short supply of that. We're always tested, aren't we? Somebody's testing us, and we all have different ideas of who that may be, but we're tested, you know? And what do we do when we're tested? You know, how do we adapt? How do we take that and do something proactive for ourselves with it? And, you know, when we can remember a time when we weren't challenged, it often helps us remember that feeling we had, you know, when things maybe weren't so difficult. And in that place, it's easy enough to cast a vision of what it can be like to get back there. But remember, we don't go backwards. We only ever move forwards. So now it's a matter of casting a new vision of what it will be like when we get to that place. And for me, it was just feeling good in my own skin. I just wanted to look in the mirror and not shy away out of embarrassment or judgment, you know, because, man, I was critical. As mean as the other kids were, I was meaner to myself. You know, that little voice in my head, it wasn't very nice. And so I had to learn to adapt. And we all go through this. And so I bring this up because change is that one thing that happens whether we like it or not. We can be a champion of change. We can embrace change when it comes. And we can learn to roll with it. And maybe at times help it along, you know. But when we fight against it, that's usually, at least in my experience, when I found that things really get hard. You know, trying to prevent change from happening, trying to prevent things from adapting, trying to keep things just as they are. You know, as I said, I've got a 16 and 18-year-old. My 18-year-old just graduated high school and she got into university. I've got only a couple months left and then she's moving out. I'm trying to delay that. You know, I'm like, no, I don't want that. You know, I don't want that change. And I know I'm dealing with some emotions internally right now. I'm trying to reconcile as I go through this next transition in my life. And I know it's created some tension in my family dynamics because of me. my emotional state and inability to deal with this big change that's coming. And so I'm just sharing some examples because I don't know. Do you relate to this, Nelson? Does this make sense? Like, does this, how about you? How do you embrace change in your life?
I definitely relate to a lot of what you just shared because, I struggled with weight issues myself while I was in high school as well. So I definitely identify with you a lot in terms of that struggle, feeling confident about who you are and being comfortable in your own skin and what it means to look in the mirror and not shy away from who you are and what you look like. So I definitely identify with that. And I know what it means to feel strong and empowered physically and what it means to want to make that change and to stay consistent and to stay open to change. I struggle with perfectionism a lot. And I've been very open and honest about what it means to struggle with perfectionism. I overcompensated, in my professional life, in my academic life, I should say. I was always the student that was very hardworking, that always got good grades. I maintained perfect attendance throughout my entire years of school.
Wow.
I received a lot of awards and a lot of accolades for like a lot of my service and a lot of my other achievements, but that didn't really replace the negative feelings I had about myself in terms of not feeling strong and empowered physically and not feeling the best and not having that healthy mindset. So that is what affected me for a long period of time. And that played a huge role in that was a main reason why I felt very disconnected from a lot of people for a long time, a lot of activities. And even now, sometimes I look back on like my middle school and high school years, and sometimes I really wish I would have not been so uptight, and I wish I would have just given myself an opportunity to just let loose and have fun and participate in more activities instead of being very, very rigid about my academic career and not having any room to have fun and to just enjoy myself and to just not put so much pressure on myself to, set unreasonable goals and set unreasonable expectations that I didn't have any room for error for in my mind. So I definitely identify with all of what you state. And when we talk about that and when we talk about masculinity, I definitely can relate because a lot of people who haven't struggled with the weight problems don't understand what people, who identify from a medical standpoint as being morbidly obese or overweight. A lot of people who haven't been on the other side of the spectrum don't understand that. They just tell you to lose weight and get over it. But it's much more to that than just telling somebody to get over, especially boys. We're just taught to just suck it up and deal with it, and I just tell people all the time, like, stop doing that. It's how is that going to be of any service to that person who's struggling with many of the weaknesses that they may have, or how is that going to make them feel better about themselves if you just constantly criticize them, or if you don't make any effort to make them want to do better or be better. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. It just it really irritates me because I tell people all the time, especially with boys and men, people just expect us to just get over stuff and act as if nothing ever bothers us. And that's not just from a physical standpoint, that's with everything. We have standards in terms of what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to present ourselves. And nobody's ever really giving us permission to be vulnerable and to talk about what our fears are and what our stressors are.
So true. I mean, as we sort of span that conversation, and I can see where we're going right now. And, that whole idea of just the gender conversation, right? Like I'm dating myself here. I was born in 76. I was raised as a teen in the 80s. And then I started to explore my 20s and my 30s, over the next 20 years beyond. And when I think back to some of the cliches, the stereotypes, right? The things that we hear repeated quite often to the point that it's becomes almost like a law. You know, we hear things so often that we just believe that it must be true. Like that I shouldn't express my emotions, you know? And when I looked at some of the male figures and role models in my life at that time, very few situations did I see people expressing themselves openly and honestly. I did, however, see anger role modeled quite frequently by the men in my life. And specifically, you know, frustration, passive aggressiveness, shortness. These were things that the men that I was around, they were very comfortable role modeling those things because they believed that that was okay. That was the emotions that were okay to express because they'd been shown by their men in their life growing up the same thing. And I imagine we could go back generations and see this repeated again and again. And I had to remind myself of this, you know, especially over the last decade as I've been trying to reconcile my own interpretations of some of these experiences. You know, the way I remember them versus the way that I experience them versus the way that I, well, bring them up now, you know, and remember on them now. Like it's wild how our mind just changes a lot over the years and decades. And, you know, so what I found really useful was this idea. Because when you start to list down, like if you want to be as simplistic as this, is like, you know, just putting down on a piece of paper. This is what I believe a man is. This is what I believe a woman is. This is what I believe a non-binary is. You know, like you can go as wide across as you want, but whatever you identify as, just start with yourself. And as you make this list of things that you believe to be true that relates to that classification, if you will, start to ask yourself, why do you believe every statistic there or every note that you've made or every word that you've associated to that? Just question why you believe that to be true. When I went through this process, I realized that a lot of the things that I believed a man was, I didn't really have any founding evidence for, you know, that a man has to be strong all the time. A man has to be a protector all the time. Like, this is what I believed, you know, like I'm the provider. I provide for my family. You know, I can't show my emotions to my women, you know, like just over and over. I can't share my emotions with another guy because he'll take advantage of me. You know, he'll use it against me. He's actually an enemy. As much as I call him a friend, he's really competition. You know, like it was wild when I started to go through the list. I was like, man, where did all this come from? And to be honest, I couldn't pinpoint where it all came from, but I don't think it was any one thing. It was more of just a life and things being repeated so often that it just becomes ingrained. And I'm bringing this up because if we don't start by questioning some of our own beliefs, we don't know what's rooted there. We don't actually know what's true and what's false. But I think if we can get more in tune with what feels right, it starts to guide us, right? That instinct piece. Because I always grew up thinking, you know, my mom was really good. Let me put it this way. My mom was great. Like she's someone that has no problem emoting. Okay. Like she has no problem sharing her emotions, telling you what she's thinking, telling her how she's feeling. And I always admired that. But then on the flip side, my dad was the opposite. He grew up with a family that didn't emote a lot. You know, I remember him telling me about, you know, just the lack of affection shown by his parents towards him. You know, and so certain things that were modeled to him growing up, it was just normal. And so, you know, he didn't have any support networks. He didn't have any support mechanisms in place. I mean, the conversation about mental health and self-care, I mean, that's really stuff that's only become really mainstream in the last like 10, 15 years, right? Like my dad didn't have any of that stuff. And so I used to hold it against him. I used to think, man, why? Why didn't you do more? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You know, so quick to criticize. And I realized, you know what? He's just doing as best as he could with what he had. And I think we all are to an extent. And so as we go down this path, and I just, because I know what we're talking about here, Nelson, can be pretty sensitive for some people. It can also be very triggering and very isolating. At least I found I isolated a lot because I'm naturally introverted. That's my comfort zone, is just being more to myself, being just with my family, not being out there in the world. But I knew many years ago I had a message to share and I wanted to make an impact and I wanted to help others. And the only way to do that was I'm going to have to learn how to be a bit more extroverted. But internally, I used to deal with social anxiety, especially dealing with more than 2 or 3 people at once. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like I would shut down, I would stutter a bit. I'd lose all train of thought. But here was something that I identified as being important to me. And it was something that I wanted to change. But I wasn't 100% sure on how I would do it. So I asked myself 3 simple questions. And these questions have been repeated, and I learned them from the late Ken Blanch, Richard, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. Ken Robinson, I think it is. Sir Ken Robinson. He did a great TED Talk. Talks all about the education system specifically, which I think everybody should go watch because it's pretty cool. And but I'm reminded that this framework of 3 questions. So anybody that's listening or watching this right now, these are 3 questions I invite you to put to memory anytime that you are feeling like there's something that needs to change, whether it be in your life, be in your career, just something that relates to you. You just feel that desire to want to see some changes, see some evolution, see some growth, right? And it could be even just something as, I want to let go of something that's holding me back in life. It might mean transitioning out of a relationship, or defining a new relationship with self. Either way, these 3 questions are it. Question 1, can I do this? It seems so simple, right? Now it's like, can I do this? Well, yeah, of course I can do this. But if we don't have belief in ourselves that we can actually start to do something that's probably very different than what we're used to doing, and to create a positive adaptation or a positive change, I love to use exercise as an example, and as it relates to, especially to weight release, because Nelson, you and I can both relate to this, and I'm sure others have at some point in their life thought about, I'd like to lose a few pounds. It's pretty much 100% across the board. Everybody I've ever met has probably had the thought or conversation at some point. So let's just say I want to release 20 pounds. Or when I was a kid, I wanted to release 80 pounds, right? And I had to ask myself, can I do this? Can I actually release that weight? Can I see my physical body change? And I had to get to a point where I could confidently answer, yes, I can do this. And that might take a little bit of looking for third-party proof, right? And for me, it was like I needed to educate myself a little bit on what were my options. Because sometimes if we don't know what direction to go, we'll just stay where we are. Like I have no idea what direction to go. So it's probably just safer for me to just sit here and wait for something to just show up. We all know that that's just sort of how procrastination works. We delay things rather than just taking action and moving forward. So can I do this involved me just figuring out what are my options and which one do I truly believe I can do? And for me, it was just mountain biking. If I start biking every day, because I remembered as a kid, I used to love cycling. So that's a great way. It's activity. You move your body. I know I've seen other really fit people on their bikes. So I can bike. Can I do this? Can I ride my bike every day? Yeah, I can do this. Okay. If I do this, will it actually work? That's question 2. So first one, can I do this? Second question, if I do it, will it work? I think that's a pretty fair question, right? Like we're all looking for that confidence that, okay, if I'm going to go and do all this effort, will there be a reward? I'm not a big fan of trying to hold a carrot out in front to motivate people, even with my own life. But at times, it can be enough just to get us over a hump, okay? But if you have to rely on something outside of yourself to constantly motivate and pull you along, there'll come a point, I don't know when, it's different for everybody, but there'll come a point where we just stop progressing. We might start regressing, moving backwards, because the thing that we were chasing and looking for, that little reward, loses an appeal. It's not as appealing anymore. It might have been something we got before. I see people that have their cheat days, or cheat meals, they call it. And I used to be of the same mindset. And then I got to a point where I just didn't really care for my cheat meal anymore. You know, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to be so consistent for 6 days just so I have one day where I can do whatever I want. It became very methodical, not as everyday life would be. You know, like I didn't want that much structure or planning. I wanted to just live. So question 2, if I do this, will it work? You have to get to a point, and this is where looking for other people that have done amazing things. Find stories of other people that have done something similar to what you want to do. If they've done it, you can do it too. Draw inspiration from those kind of stories. Look within. Think about what it is that you're committing to doing and just trust a process rather than becoming fixated on where you're going to end up. If you do some reading on growth mindset versus fixed mindset, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into the details on that right now, but when you look forward to the actual journey itself versus just the destination where you're trying to get to, you're going to have way more fun, and it's going to be much more natural and easier to sustain because you're not worried about, hey, are we there yet? Are we there yet? You know, like you're just on the journey and you're experiencing things along the way and growing. Last question, and then back to you. And sorry, Nelson, I'm taking a little bit longer here, but this third question, very important. I'd go as far as say it's more important than the first question. Can I do this? And question 2, if I do this, will it work? Questions 3 is it worth it? Now, when I'm speaking to teams or working with organizations or companies and doing like larger trainings with groups of people, I can use a term like it. Is it worth it? You know, we're talking about big changes or change management in an organization or a nonprofit. Sure. Is it worth it for us to do these things? But when I'm talking about you and me and those that are probably listening to this, the individuals, us as people, you have to ask the question this way. Am I worth it? That one's not as easy to answer. It's not. It's not a matter of looking for answers outside of ourselves. That answer lies within. And if you struggle with answering that question and fully getting to a yes that embodies everything in you, where yes, I am worth it. I am worth the change. I am worth the effort to make the changes in my life. If you can't confidently say that, go talk to some of those people that love you unconditionally. Those communities that you're a part of. Maybe you're a local church or other clubs. And ask them, here's some changes I want to make. Do you think I'm worth it? You know, I'll tell you right now, they're going to tell you, hell yeah, you're worth it. And maybe even want to support you along the way. Because it's that little community piece that ultimately helps us sustain the journey. Because traveling the road by ourselves, sure, it's fine. You pick the pace, pick the direction, but it gets pretty lonely. It's a lot more fun as human beings when we experience things together. So those are the 3 questions. Can I do this? If I do this, will it work? And then lastly, am I worth it? If you put those 3 questions to memory, anytime that you're ready to embrace change, those are the 3 questions that will help you do it.
Yes, those are really, really great questions. Very, very thought-provoking and powerful. And I definitely understand everything that you say when you talk about that and when you share your story. And these are all of the things that I keep in mind, you know, even, you know, as an author and even as a radio personality, just remembering what my purpose is for, you know, writing each and every book, what my purpose is for getting on this platform every Tuesday evening and talking about things like this. And even with, you know, pursuing my career in the healthcare industry and just being a student, a sociology student at my college and just finishing up my last year, I think about all of that. And I often think about the fact that, you know, I'm a 90s, you know, kid. So a lot of us, we are very, very goal oriented, and we are obsessed with wanting to make a difference in some way or another. All of us, you know, we're passionate about things and we want to make a difference by using that. We want to change the world. We want to be change agents. A lot of the 90s babies, we want to be that driving force. And I often think about that too, and how important it is for me to do what I'm doing and to remember my purpose and why it's worth investing the time, the energy, and the effort into doing these things. So before we wrap up the show, what are some of your upcoming events or projects that you're working on now that many of the listeners can look out for?
Well, thank you. Well, listen, I've absolutely loved this conversation. Just an FYI, Nelson. I love your show. I think it's wonderful what you're doing and putting out to the world, and the way you show up so authentically and openly. I just think we have so much to learn, and you're a wonderful example of what's possible if we're just open to sharing and being a bit vulnerable, right? And so thank you for making it easy for me to be a bit vulnerable today as well. I just wanted to acknowledge you on that front. As far as projects, my big one right now, which has been ongoing for a few years now, a good friend of mine, Nick Wood, I made mention of him actually in the TED Talk because he was the first person that said yes to me when I presented the idea of Mentorship Mondays, Mentorship Mondays. So it's a men's group that we started when we were living in Bali. My family and I were living in Bali, Indonesia for a few years. And while I was there, I felt this need to connect with other men openly, honestly, without any fear of judgment, without any alcohol, without drugs, without drama. That was pretty important. And so I shared the idea with my friend Nick, who lived on another part of the island. And he's like, yeah, I'll be there. And I was like, whoa, well, that was easy. Okay. So he was the first one that said yes. And very quickly we realized it was going to be something that we would co-facilitate and co-produce. And we just wanted to create a space where guys would come together and share openly and honestly what's alive and real for them without any concerns, without all the baggage that sometimes we bring with us based on past experiences and learnings. And it became apparent that there's a lot of other men out there that were seeking the same sort of space. And so it's not for profit. We don't charge anything. We pivoted to doing it online when COVID happened, and it's been growing just organically by word of mouth. And so we continue to meet on Zoom. We have a UK group. We have a Southeast Asian group. We have a couple North American groups that meet in various time zones. And we're just guys coming together to help each other. And it's been wonderful. And that is something that I'm very passionate about, and I will continue to focus on for the next few months. And there's some other stuff I'll be doing, but that's the one that's really got me, it's got all the feels going for me right now, So it's also because it's a big part of my own life, and I know my life would be very different, especially my experience of over the last 18 months with what we've all experienced with this pandemic. Having that weekly Monday night commitment to get together with some other positive individuals and share what's going on in our lives, it made the experience very different for me. I don't know what it would have been like had I not had that community. And so it's made me realize that more people need stuff like this. And so that's what I'm doing. That's what's got me alive and real right now. And thanks for asking that question. I really appreciate that.
Yes. And yes, you're welcome. You're very welcome. And I want to thank you again for appearing on my show. Where can some people reach you if they want to learn more about you and the work that you do, every single day like this?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find once you know how to spell my name. I have a website, daimanuel.com. About 2,000 articles on there. I've been blogging and creating content for a long time online. I was going to say it's a bit of a rabbit hole there. There's lots of information and resources, all complimentary, geared to help people with just living their best life, like right now. And so that's a great resource I invite people to go check out. And then if you're on social media, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Connect with me on any or all, and let's have a conversation. But that's it. That's me.
Well, thanks again for appearing on my show. This has been a very, very thought-provoking discussion, but it was a much-needed discussion. And this is, again, my second time having a discussion about toxic masculinity with another guest. And you are my first person from Canada on my show to actually talk and be on my show. I've been interviewing people from all over the place, but you're the first person that from Canada that's appeared on my show. So that's the first for you. Yes. So,
I love it.
Yes. So A couple of announcements. This is for the listeners. So a couple of announcements that I'm going to make. I want you all to make sure that you head on over to Amazon.com to purchase a copy of The Beauty in Us, Our Souls in Armor. That's volume 3 in my book series. So again, feel free to head on over to Amazon.com to purchase The Beauty in Us, Our Souls in Armor. That is the 3rd volume of my book series, The Beauty in Us. The Beauty in Us, Our Reality is also available. Volume 1 is also available. And Volume 2, The Beauty in Us, Vulnerable Masculinity, is also available in a paperback and ebook format, just as the others are. So without any further ado, I'm going to close tonight's broadcast with a little bit of, thought-provoking, words. I want you all to just remember that, being vulnerable does not make you weak. It makes you stronger when you're in touch with who you are and what your foundation is and what you stand for. Oftentimes we're conditioned to believe that being vulnerable is a weakness and that it's not something that we were supposed to showcase. But when you take time to really dig deep and look inside, you'll realize how imperative it is, and you'll realize how satisfied you feel after you come out on the other side of everything stronger and better than ever. So this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown. Make sure you all subscribe to the Awesome God Radio app. Download that and follow us on all of the social media platforms at Awesome God Radio. Make sure you follow me on on social media at Nelson E. Brown. And feel free to connect with me directly. And I will see you all next Tuesday. So make an appointment to meet me back here on Tuesday, July 13th, 2021 at 6 p.m. This is Nelson E. Brown, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.